You find yourselves in a strange room, surrounded on all sides by trinkets and baubles of a variety of designs, each depicting a tale of heroism, of romance, of stark terror, or of uproarious laughter. Before you is a pane of glass, a halo of lights cascading around it, illuminating your face. Letters appear across the glass as if by magic. Now recording. Bradley the Wizened, describe yourself.
Bedecked in my night sky robes of Star Trek binging, I'm a level 9 wizard with a husky, hairy frame, a buzzed head, and a soft but rugged, strokable beard. I stand heroically atop a verdant hill, leaning on my +6 magic staff of movie soundtrack identification. I am the most huggable wizard you'll ever see.
Very good. Now, Sir Jim the Virtuous, how do you appear?
I am a level 8 paladin. I have piercing blue eyes, a husky, hairy fireplug presence, resplendent in my golden armor of buttery popcorn. The wind gently ruffles my crew-cut hair. I have a +7 sword of wild kaiju taming and wear a confident, knowing smile.
Ready for adventure.
Yes.
All right. A man approaches, longbow in hand, arrow nocked. He has a thick brown beard, balding hair, and around his neck is an amulet of indie movie knowledge +3. Fellows, I am William the Swift, and I need your help. Please follow me, weapons at the ready, as we embark upon the Movie Bears Podcast.
Movie Bears Podcast with Brad, Jim, and Will. What have they been watching lately? They're husky, hairy, huggable homos. Movie Bears Podcast.
Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears Podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week, along with my husky, hairy, huggable homos and friends, we review films either current or classic on this show. This is a pretty special one, I gotta tell you. A, because it's episode 469. Nice.
Ooh,
But
yeah.
also, we're bringing not one, but two movies coming at you out of South by Southwest Film 2023 in wide release and watchable everywhere. We're going to be reviewing Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, and Tetris. So two big movies, lots and lots to talk about. But before we can do that amazing thing we call movie reviewing, let me introduce you to the aforementioned co-host. Jim Pugliafico is with us on the show. Jim, how are you?
Paladin Jim is ready to go. I'm good. Thanks, babe. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about these two movies. These are two new releases that people can go watch right now if they want.
Indeed. Yeah, it's going to be great to talk about these films with you, babe. Welcome, and love that you chose Paladin as your D&D class. And let me introduce you to our resident dungeon master who gave us a fun cold open for this week's show. William Lindis, welcome to the Movieverse Podcast.
Oh, Brad, Jim, thanks for being a little silly with me at the beginning of this episode. This is going to be a very nerdy episode, not just because of Dungeons and Dragons, but also because of Tetris, right? We're talking about gaming, and all of that brought to us by the great folks at South by Southwest. So I'm really excited for this one. This is going to be cool.
Well, I don't think you're alone, Will. We have a comment in the live chat from our very own Hammy, who says, I attempt to use my ears of listening and rolled an 18. Dungeon Master Will, I'll leave it to you to confirm or deny if he was successful in his MBP listening check.
Absolutely. With an 18, that's an unmitigated success. You beat the DC of 10. These are things that actually mean something if you play Dungeons and Dragons. But Hammy, successful roll.
Awesome. All right. Well, as we mentioned, we're going to be reviewing both Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, as well as Tetris. Just to give you a little bit of setup here, we actually saw both of these films as part of the programming festival at South by Southwest Film Fest 2023, just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I don't know how many weeks ago.
Seems like a month,
I,
but it's probably been 2 weeks.
I know, right?
It's all relative.
So we're going to be bringing you reviews of both of those movies here in just a few minutes. But I also wanted to let you know that we're going to be continuing our coverage of South by Southwest Film Festival 2023 over the next few weeks as well. We always say documentaries don't get enough love, which is why next week's show, in conjunction with our main Super Mario Brothers review, is going to be highlighting some of the best docs coming out of South by Southwest. You're not going to want to miss those. You're going to want to put them on your list immediately to see once they're available. So make sure you tune in for that. And then we've got some additional reviews, including Evil Dead Rise, coming at you a little bit later this month. So lots of cool stuff, hopefully coming for you down the pipeline. But we do have 2 movies to discuss. So we might as well jump right into it. Jim and Will, are you ready to get into our session of Dungeons and Dragons?
Yep. Let's roll
Just
it.
got a natural 20 on my initiative check. Let's do it.
All right. Well, then, we say this all the time, but if this is your first time listening to the show, you've probably never heard it before. We're going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons as well as Tetris, spoiler free, for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll give you a fair warning before we open things up to spoilers. So if you haven't seen the films, if you've seen one but not the other, if you've seen both, whatever, feel free to listen as desired, as wanted, as needed. We will definitely give you plenty of heads up, though, when it's time for spoilers, so you can step away if needed, so you can skip ahead using the time index in the show notes. All that good stuff will be at your disposal. All right, here we go. Our discussion of Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves. All right, Dungeon Master Will. I'm just going to call you that this whole D&D segment.
I thought that was your nickname.
Well, I mean, in different ways. But, well, I have DM'd before, so I guess it counts for both. Anyway, that's a total aside. Will, as one of our resident Dungeons and Dragons experts, it seemed only fitting for you to maybe kick this one off. If you don't mind, obviously tell us what this movie is, of course, and you know, your thoughts. Did you like it? Did you not? Is it worth seeing? But if you don't mind, maybe talk a little bit as well about the experience of seeing this at South by Southwest. What did you think of this one?
Absolutely. So, let's start with the description of the movie itself. Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Amongst Thieves. This movie stars Chris Pine as a charming thief who is joined by a band of unlikely adventurers, including Michelle Rodriguez, Regé-Jean Page from Bridgerton. We've got Hugh Grant in here, Sophia Lillis, Justice Smith. They go on this epic quest, all looking for this one lost relic. But things go dangerously awry when they run afoul of the wrong people. This, of course, is a movie that's based off of the tabletop RPG franchise called Dungeons and Dragons, which has been around since the early to mid 70s, like 1974. And there's been attempts to bring it to the big screen before. Year 2000 had a regrettable, I would say, entry starring Justin Whalen, Jeremy Irons with blue lipstick, all of that. But we got a chance to see this one at South by Southwest, and first of all, I loved this. I loved this movie a lot. It feels like it captures the kind of the chaotic, manic, funny energy that happens at a table. I think a lot of people tend to think about like Dungeons and Dragons as either a nerdy thing that includes a bunch of like dice rolling and character sheets and spreadsheets and stuff, and it is. Or sometimes an overly serious thing about a bunch of like kids down in a basement, like hunched over as like waiting on the event of, which we've seen that in media a lot. And it can be, all of these things are valid, but more than anything, I know for me over my 30 years of playing this dang game, it's a game of just wild fun. A bunch of people just hanging out together and just sort of free forming some sort of improvised story. A lot of it being kind of like comedy, because especially as adults, we're letting loose after long work weeks. We got that here in this film, and we got this with the experience at South by Southwest, where the 1,200 plus people that filled the Paramount Theater were just eating this up. It's a fun movie. It's a funny movie. When and not just because of like references on screen. I think there are definitely some that like it's cool to know from the games, but nothing is presented in a way that's not accessible. In fact, there were people who had only come to that screening because they thought Roger was really hot in Bridgerton, and so they came to this screening. And they had never played Dungeons and Dragons before. In the questions afterwards, when they were asking questions, they said they would never plan on playing it, but they loved the movie. They had fun with it. They engaged with it. They got it. This one was an absolute win for me. I think the closest analog in terms of like what this film is something a little bit like that first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. This is a very ragtag movie about a bunch of ragtag characters that when it gets the option of being fun, it always veers into that option, whatever that happens to be, from action to adventure to snark to comedy to heroism. All of those things get captured here. I really enjoyed this movie, and I watched it with my gaming group after we got back, and it came out this last weekend. We all showed up in our D&D shirts and just had a blast with this one. I'm going to turn this back over to y'all because I could literally do this for hours. Like, I'm going to gush, but this movie was so fucking cool. As someone who has this background and has this lived experience, it feels sort of like a lifelong dream to see this version of this movie play out on screen the way it did. So 2 thumbs up for me.
All right, Will, thank you so much for that setup. Sounds like this movie was a big win for you. Jim, how about for you? Because I know your experience, you haven't played Dungeons and Dragons for 30 years, but you have been a movie buff for 30 plus years. How did this one hit for you?
I have played Dungeons and Dragons in the last 30 years. I just don't play it a lot. I have dabbled in a game or two. So I know, it's nowhere near the knowledge and reverence for the game that you guys have, but it's a little bit. So I know enough to get some of the references in this film. God, guys, this movie, as you said, I'm not the biggest Dungeons and Dragons fan, but this movie is like a home run. This thing hits on all fronts, if you ask me. I thought it's getting the feeling of the game out of this movie, I think, is a home run. I think the story is great. It's not too convoluted, which a lot of action movies want to do. I thought the set pieces were great. They were just conceptualized and shot and portrayed very wonderfully on the screen. I thought there was nothing muddy about this movie that, like, if you watch some of these other big, superhero movies, a lot of times the action is very muddy and just not super clear. I thought the effects and stuff in this movie were pretty top notch. There's some goofiness going on with some of the animals and creatures or whatnot, but like I don't know, for some reason I was totally bought in to what was going on the screen. The comedy was just at the right level for me. I don't think they tried to force anything too much into this film. But yeah, I think like I said, this movie is a home run. Look, I don't put a lot of credence in like Rotten Tomatoes scores and stuff like that. But this movie is ranking in the 90s on both the audience and critics front. And you don't generally see that happen. So this movie is like a 4 quadrant movie, I think, and I think it's doing very well. I hope it is. But it's a lot of fun in the theaters. I can't recommend it more. If you haven't seen it yet, I would see this in a theater. I think it's a really fun time. Bring some friends or family, and have a fun day. It's going to be great.
All right. Well, another big recommend from our resident paladin. Thank you, Jim, for weighing in with your thoughts. Hammy has a question, and we'll get to my thoughts, but I think his question takes precedence here. He says, are they going to call the sequel, because this is me now, there's going to be one. Are they going to call the sequel Advanced Dungeons and Dragons? What do we think?
First of all, I love that. That's a reference to the second edition, or I guess kind of prior to second edition, they moved it into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons as the game system. I have a feeling it's going to be Dungeons and Dragons : something something something, because what they've done here is they've made it very SEO searchable friendly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they really want to get some sort of keywords in here. I would love it though if Advanced is in the title. I think that would be a perfect homage.
That would be awesome. All right. Well, Hammy, great question. We'll see what they do with the name of the sequel to this film, because I can't imagine, after the success this film is having right now and all the buzz, I don't see a world where we don't get a sequel to it. But listen, I'm just going to be upfront and say that I was really scared going into this movie. Will, you mentioned the earlier Dungeons and Dragons films, and I found out that there was a film that came out direct to DVD or VHS or whatever it was at the time that I didn't even know about. I never saw. The first couple were terrible. I hated them. I grew up watching the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon on TV. That was my first introduction to D&D. I've actually found all those episodes on YouTube, and I'm enjoying rewatching them right now. But going into this movie at South by, it was interesting, because on one hand, I'm really excited to be there, right? It's the first movie that we saw at South by. We woke up at like 6:00 in Tucson so that at, whatever time in Texas we could like get our express passes the day before we traveled. We got our passes. We got to Austin. Will, we met up with you and Scott and the pups, and then we all went downtown and stood in line for 3 hours. And I'm like, we have express passes. We're going to get in. We're fairly close to the front of the line. We're going to get good seats. But I'm like, is this movie really going to be worth standing in line all that time? And I'll tell you what, it fucking was. It absolutely was worth it. This movie just hits so many triggers for me. It's got obviously a dramatic story. We've got the big bad evil person doing evil things. You've got the ragtag group of heroes coming together to try to take down the big bad evil person. You guys know that comedy is a weird thing for me. Most comedies, I don't laugh. They bug me. It's cringy. But I laughed a lot in this film. And a lot of the humor reminded me of like shit that like people in my Dungeons and Dragons group would like say or do, it felt like I was watching a D&D adventure play out. And, we've kind of seen that with like Legend of Mox Vacina, which is a fun show. But seeing this in live action with a cast of folks that like I never would have imagined Chris Pine or Michelle Rodriguez in a Dungeons and Dragons movie. And I'll tell you, when I saw the trailer initially, I was just like, really? But I think the trailer really misrepresents what this movie is. And it shows like the worst jokes from the movie, which is too bad. I was totally surprised and blown away by this film. We'll talk more as we get into spoilers here in a second about kind of the story. But one thing I wanted to bring up, just a cool thing that happened at South by. Two things, actually. One, after the credits roll, the cast and the director come out, And this beautiful, like moment happens where this little old lady comes up to the Q&A microphone, and she's like, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. I liked the movie. It was good. But Reggie John Page, could you please come down and give me a hug?
Yeah.
And I'm
Hmm.
on one hand, I'm like, festival crowd. I can hear people like groaning and moaning because she's not asking an actual question. But then he gallantly swooped down off that stage, got on his knees because she was kind of tiny compared to him, and just gave her the biggest, warmest hug ever. And I thought that was incredible. That was so cool that he did that. And then Michelle Rodriguez got asked what class she would play if she actually played D&D, and she said she'd be a shape-shifting druid. And that was my first D&D class, and I have a huge love of Michelle Rodriguez, so like that just made me so happy to hear. That was super fun.
We're gonna have to.
Yeah, I got.
We're gonna have
Go
to
ahead,
find
Will.
Michelle Rodriguez's like agent's information, because when we inevitably play a game of Dungeons and Dragons together, we should invite her to play with us, and she can play the druid. We'll let her play druid in that, and yeah, I think we'll have a good time.
That would be
Yeah,
amazing.
come on,
That'd
Michelle.
be
Michelle,
amazing.
if you're listening to this right now, come to the show. We'd love to have you.
Yeah. I know we got a couple comments we want to get to, but I also have a couple things to say before we launch into spoilers at some point. I just want to say that this is the first movie. Will, I don't know if it was you or Brad who mentioned Guardians of the Galaxy. This was the first cast, like not the actors necessarily, but the characterizations of these characters really comes together in a really kind of magical way and works all together. I loved pretty much every single one of the main characters here in the adventuring group. There's a lot to say, of course, about the actors that are portraying them as well. But I just love the characterizations. I didn't think they were, too goofy. Somewhat believable, even though this is obviously a magical world that they're in. But yeah, I really love that about this film.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Well, we've got a couple of comments, but I think I want to get to those after the spoiler jump, just so that we can kind of incorporate those and expand on them. But before we do that, Jim, Will, any other thoughts you want to get out before we make that leap?
I will share one other fun moment from the festival part of it. And that was when we went over to the Highball, which is the bar that is attached to the Alamo Drafthouse, which isn't where we saw the screening, but Alamo Drafthouse was one of the official stops on South by Southwest. And they had a photo booth, and so I'm showing it to the camera right now, but they had the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves photo booths where you had lanterns and candles and signature cocktails, and there was an actual 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot gelatinous cube like you see in the trailers sitting up on the stage. It was really, really cool. And I think about that moment, even though it was only a couple of weeks ago. I think about that moment often and kind of like, man, I want to go back. I can go back to the theater right now. It's down the street. I could just drive it, but I want to go back to that moment. I want to go back to that environment.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I had a blast going in and checking out the tavern that the Highball became, and taking pictures with you guys. And it was just such a cool setting. But the next day, we're at Alamo waiting for a movie to start, and I had to use the bathroom. And the main men's room was like closed, so we had to use the bathroom in the Highball. So I remember walking into Highball, and like I hear this loud, epic like D&D music playing, and I'm approaching the gelatinous cube, and I take a left to go to the bathroom, and then the music's playing in the bathroom. It's probably the most epic piss I've ever taken. I got to be honest.
Nice.
Very good.
Yeah. So kudos to Alamo and Highball for giving me that.
For enhancing that piss.
For giving me that experience. All right, cool. All right. We are going to go ahead and move on into spoilers for Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. If you've not yet seen this film, you don't want to be spoiled on its plot, this is your chance. Go ahead, step away for the next 15 minutes and then come on back for our discussion of Tetris. But if you continue listening, you do so at your own peril. Jim mentioned we had a couple comments, and we wanted to get to those once we made the jump to spoilers. Rich, who's a very, very handsome, cute man, I have to say. Rich says, the lack of exposition was one of my favorite aspects of the movie. They didn't slow things down to explain things. They just let it flow naturally. Obviously, I have done some DMing myself, but it's been a while. Will, I think you're probably more current on your experience than I. What did you think of that sort of organic unfolding of past events versus like a pump and dump right at the beginning?
It was important because I think that, and I've said it before on this show, one of my least favorite parts of movies is the once upon a time there was a this. And sometimes it can work. Just because I don't normally like it doesn't mean it can't sometimes. But here we were mid-action with sort of like a narration that was happening like in scene. You know, he was actually describing to his jailers, his parole board, essentially, whether or not he should go free, and here's why, because of this backstory. So we got that backstory through that. They whipped through a lot of backstory in a short period of time, but always in a way that kept things funny, kept things engaging, and got to the punchline of Jonathan, and like going through the window as quickly as they could to sort of kick off the title screen of the movies. I love that a lot here, because ultimately the thing about Dungeons and Dragons as a game that this captures is that it is a collaborative story told by the players. And so what this did was this kept the narration in one of the characters, coming straight from one of the characters' mouths, and got to introducing all of the characters and building that party as quick as possible so we could start seeing those interactions. That was beautiful. So I 100% agree, Rich.
Rock on. And Matthew has a comment here. He says, as a longtime Forgotten Realms fan, I love the attention to detail in the world. Jim, I know you have dabbled in Dungeons and Dragons over the years, but as a kind of a newcomer a little bit to the world of D&D, did you feel like the world that this film was set in was like overwhelming with like details and exposition and places and name drops, or was it like a steady stream but like manageable? How did it hit for you?
Exactly that. It was not overwhelming at all. It didn't try to pull out every D&D reference that it could and kind of swamp audience members like me who really aren't interested in that, but only the ones that serve the story, right? And that, the story is king, and that the story and characters are king, and that's what this movie did. I never felt lost. Well, with maybe one exception. We're in spoilers now, right?
Bring it up. Absolutely. Let's do it.
Oh yeah. Just I'm a little lost on the use of portals, but there's a portal sequence in here that is there's a couple portal sequences because I forget what it's a staff of hither
thither. Good memory.
Hither thither staff. Look at me being all fucking nerdy and shit. No, but like when they used it, like kind of like 3/4 of the way through the movie, it lost me a little bit. But even we've seen the movie twice now, and I think I actually enjoyed it more the second time, if that's even possible. Because I mean, we saw it at the Paramount, and it was a lot to absorb. Like it was just a kind of an overwhelming experience. It was great. But I got to focus a little bit more on the movie itself, the movie making, the second time through, and man, it holds up. It really does.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate what you're saying about the way that this film maybe strikes you as someone who is not as ingrained in D&D. Really hitting, on all thrusters, but like also, Will, hearing you, I think my experience is similar to yours, and that like the D&D fan in me was like super, super happy with this for sure. But Jim, given all the magic and crazy things happening, I don't blame you for maybe having a little confusion with the portal thing and maybe how some of the mechanics and magic work. Was there something in particular that was maybe confusing about that we could help clarify?
Oh, it was just like I'm an engineer by training and by occupation. So I'm trying to think of like, okay, which side of the portal are they entering? Which side are they exiting? And which side is on the painting that's facing down? Because remember at one point it faced down, but there was portal on the other side. So it was a little, I don't know, just stupid shit that I probably, if somebody explained it to me, I'd probably be okay. But it was just a little. And at one point you're like, Jim, stop trying to analyze the fucking portals and just enjoy the story and how it's gonna work in the plot.
I'll just say this: literally, a wizard did it. Well, I guess he's a sorcerer, but I mean, same thing applies.
Right. Yeah.
You know, to the point about like the Matthew's point about lifelong Forgotten Realms fan, I think there's a nice thing that this film does in that it creates its Easter eggs in such a way that they are there to supplement like the experience if you have that experience, but they're not set there to be distracting if you don't know them. For example, one of the big like action set pieces about halfway-ish through the movie was when they fought a chubby red dragon in a cave. And so from the film, if you've come in here knowing nothing about the world except for what you've got on the screen, you know, it's like, oh, that's an interesting choice for this dragon. It made for kind of a fun visual effect. You could understand why they were there because they, you know, they had to get the helmet MacGuffin and they had to escape from the bad guys who were after them. And now this dragon was there. Now they have to go through all this stuff. Cool, fun. If you had come from the background of like having read a bunch of this stuff playing in that, you'd know that's Thimbershoud, you know, who was kept there and pampered in this you know underground city by this group of psionics. You know, like there's this whole backstory there, which is cool when you see the character. If you know that, cool. But if you don't, you lose nothing by not having that. The same thing, like when it scans across the map and you see, oh, the prison's up in Icewind Dale. You know, if you know any of the Icewind Dale stuff, that's awesome. If you don't, it's like, oh, it's in the northern part that's snowy. That makes sense. So I love that about this movie. I feel like Dungeons and Dragons over the past like decade especially has become very, very good at being very, very accessible. We saw it during the pandemic, like skyrocket numbers because people could play with groups over Discord. There's successful like Gen Zers who are on TikTok who were born after I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, who have amazing, enriching communities based off of their experiences with the game. And it's because the game has always found its way to be both very lore intensive, but also very accessible to newbies when it's presented right. This movie is a part of that legacy.
Yep.
Yeah, this was a very understandable, like this was a quest movie, right? And as most campaigns in Dungeons and Dragons are some sort of quest, I guess, usually. And it was very clear, you know, from the outset what we were trying to do here. I also like the fact that, you know, the emotional payoff at the end of this movie worked for me, right? Even in such a friggin' nerd movie, maybe it was obvious to some, you know, it was kind of, semi-obvious, but it still worked because it was about characters that you, by that point in the movie, you cared about, right? And the movie helped you care about these characters. And to fold that into a movie like this is only something that, you know, a property like maybe Guardians of the Galaxy can pull off. You know what I mean? At least for me. And this one does it.
Yeah, and I think it does a really good job while it's doing that of also kind of folding in, you know, all these Easter eggs or these fun things to find, right, about this world and the characters and all the things that are happening. Andrew Marsh has a comment in the chat. He says there were tons of Easter eggs for the fans, but not enough to slow down the plot. And I think that's really true, Andrew. One of my favorite Easter eggs in this movie actually helped to advance the plot a little bit, which was the adventuring party from the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon shows up here in the big climactic like fight maze thing at the end, and we see those characters like fighting the displacer beast and trying to avoid the gelatinous cube, and they end up getting caught in the middle of the maze. And our party of adventurers with Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez, they all kind of get there and they see what happened to that party, and then they're able to successfully beat the maze, I think, because they see some of the other things that have happened. So it's kind of neat the way that this movie both gives you those Easter eggs, but like incorporates them in ways that helps to just keep things moving at all times.
Yeah, and all the different like spells and abilities and monsters, all of these things are based off of stuff from the games. But again, like you don't have to know that that guy is using the green flame blade spell. You just have to know that one of the bad guys at one point, his sword gets all like green and flamey as he starts cutting through some stuff, like because it looks cool and it makes sense because it's a magical world. I think that is really neat, and this movie also does a really good job of capturing something that's called the rule of cool when you play, which is like you want it to be a fun experience, so you want your players to do cool shit, right? And so all of the major characters had a sub arc and had a scene where they got to just really do some cool stuff. I mean, there's a druid in this, Doric. The druid in this is just so remarkably fun to watch. Sophia Lillis, first of all, plays the heck out of that part. But there's sequences where she's shifting into different forms. She's got a cool little thing on her. It all felt really cool to watch. When Michelle Rodriguez is just going into like absolute like ass kicker mode, like punching and kicking and swinging her axe around and just taking out guys left and right. When Regé-Jean Page's character gets to do the same. Everyone gets a moment to really shine and do their thing. And that was so cool. It made me want to play all of the different characters and classes, and that's really important. I didn't like one of the things in that 2000s Dungeons and Dragons movie that I hated, and like my gaming group, we saw it together and we joke about it to this day. There's a point where at the end of the movie, they've gotten all of the party together, and then there's like one more big bad, and then the main character of it says, "Sorry guys, I have to do this part by myself," and like does the last part of the movie solo. And I remember being so pissed off because that is so antithetical to just the idea of like a cooperative game. This movie got that so well. And I know that's such a little thing, like it's its own thing. It's a movie, it can stand on its own, but it does carry this brand, and it is presenting itself as an ensemble. And for it to do both of those things and to let everyone shine, I think is such a feather in this movie's hat.
It looked like also Hugh Grant plays the villain in here. Well, he plays one of the villains in here, called Forge, and it looked like he was just having a blast, like hamming it up in his characterization of Forge, and so that was great. I mean, he was one of those villains that really thinks he has all the power, but really has none of the power, and I think that made that fun to watch, for that character. But I think probably my favorite character was Zenk, the paladin. I just love the characterization. Like he was total deadpan, but had some of the fun. Was involved in some of the funniest stuff on the screen. And so yeah, I think Zenk is probably my favorite, followed by oh god, I can't even pick a second one because I really like that.
I love that you called out Zinc. One of the reasons I think this trailer does a disservice to this, I think the trailer does a disservice to the movie, is that like there are different lines in some of these scenes in the trailer that are not in the movie, and the lines from the movie I think are 1,000 times better. I think in the trailer, the Zinc character's like, "We'll have to cross the ancient bridge of da 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 to get to the thing." But in the movie, what he actually says is, we'll have to cross the bridge to get the thing, but we'll start off going on alternating squares every 5 feet, to the right, and then we'll switch and go to the left, and then and I'll tell you what,
But halfway there,
that has fucking happened in D&D games that I have played in over the last 30 years so many fucking times, where it's just like, good fucking God, like, this is so convoluted and confusing, but I fucking love it, And I wonder, I don't know, maybe they thought that line would, like, confuse people too much as a joke in a movie, but, like, if you really want to showcase your movie as D&D, I think including a moment like that would have been really good,
Yeah, we said the trailer didn't do this movie any favors. However, I guess I'm okay with that in the long run. We saw the movie, we enjoyed it. I think word of mouth is going to push this movie to have some really good weeks coming up. The screening we saw it in here at home wasn't jam packed, but it was pretty full, as that movie theater goes for a matinee showing, and I think it's performing very well. So. And audiences are liking it, so and critics as well. So I think that's
I'll
good.
tell you this, according to Box Office Mojo, Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves dethroned John Wick Chapter 4's second week.
Oof.
D&D
Wow.
came in at 37.2 million, and John Wick Chapter 4 was 28.3 million. I think that's domestic, just here in the US, but I mean that's pretty impressive, I gotta say.
And I think it's one of those ones too where, like, when they say kind of like some of the box office stuff I read about this one was really about, like, it has like an okay opening, right? Like, it's definitely not a bad opening, an okay opening, but I think that it's positioned with the word of mouth to have like a long tail, right? Like, I think there's going to be people that are going to see it multiple times. I have two gaming groups that I run with. I have a Sunday group with the Bears, and Monday night with some of my friends from college, right? And both groups wanted to see this movie, and so I've got another screening of it coming up this Friday with the other gaming group, and I think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be people that are going to see this a couple of times within the community. So this isn't going to be, at least my hunch is not going to be one of those like in and out of theaters in 2 weeks type things. I think it's going to be a few weeks of like tacking additional monies on.
Well, I don't know if this is TMI for the podcast, but I think I saw you get in trouble with your second gaming group for posting pictures of seeing it with the first gaming group. And I was like, oh shit, that's awkward.
I told them. Yeah. In fact, we were buying our tickets at one point while we were recording tonight. Just like, oh, they're on sale. Let's get them.
Oh, nice.
So I snagged some tickets tonight.
That's fun. Well, we do have another whole movie to talk about, but I want to give us just one more final chance. Anything else you want to say about D&D before we move on?
Yeah, for me, it's, just to sort of put a exclamation mark on this particular point. I think if you are a deep fan of these games, you're going to get a lot out of this, and you're going to have a fun time. You're going to get those nostalgic feelings of why you enjoy playing the game without it just being like random member berries thrown at you. Like, this is the right type of like, nostalgia. But I think also if you're someone who's maybe intimidated by franchises with a lot of lore, this is not going to be one of those for you. This is something that you can just walk right into without reading a thing and get a good solid experience out of. So because of that, this is very honestly one of the very few movies that I think I can almost just broadly recommend to just about anyone. Like, it's hard for me to say which audience member. Like, I guess if you don't like fun, like, don't go see this movie.
And yeah, I mean, Brad, you've often one of your favorite movies of all time is The Princess Bride, and a movie that I also love too. For its, Rob Reiner's great, but his writing and his direction of that that's another quest movie with a band of characters, right, off trying to do this thing. This movie had so many vibes from something like The Princess Bride that I got from this movie. I don't know if other people get the same sense, but there are sections of this movie I'm like, it's it's certainly not copying Princess Bride, but it has the same really cool vibe of a bunch of fun characters to come together with the comedy thrown in. Yeah, and that worked for me. The combination of Princess Bride, Dungeons and Dragons, Game of Thrones. It's just kind of all in there.
You could almost call it like the Princess Bride of the Galaxy.
Yeah,
Something.
By the way,
yeah, that
would 100% watch
Dungeons
that
and
movie.
Dragons, Princess Bride of the Galaxy. That's the next movie.
Oh, that's to answer the question from before. That's
Yeah.
the second
Yeah.
movie.
That
is the second movie. Yeah.
Love it. Speaking of, more movies, hopefully, fingers crossed, and additional content. One thing I wanted to throw out there, if you really love this movie as much as I did, and you love to read, and you love Dungeons and Dragons, obviously, I found out the other day that there are 2 prequel novels that take place before this movie with these characters. One involves the bard, barbarian, and the sorcerer leading up to this film. And the other is all about Doric the Druid and how she gets the unique ability to become an owl bear, which is something Druids typically don't do. I guess I haven't played a Druid in 20 years, but I actually just started reading the book about Doric the Druid, and holy shit, is it really good? It's amazing.
Good.
It's so fucking good.
Wow.
I was afraid these books would suck ass. I started reading the book that takes place between the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor games, and it's trash. It's terrible. I've never read a book more insultingly written for I don't know, a fan base. But no, these books are fantastic. They don't cost much, and they're surprisingly good. We might get more adventures with these characters, so maybe good to get some additional backstory. So there you go. Check them out. All right, cool. Guys, we have another movie to talk about. Let's do it. The next film on our docket is Tetris, which is available on Apple TV Plus right now. A lot of people have been seeing this movie and posting about it on social media. We saw it, of course, at South by Southwest Film 2023. And we want to tell you all about our experience as well as review that film. So we're going to talk about the movie spoiler free for about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll give you that spoiler warning when it is time. But if you haven't seen it yet, don't fret about dashing away. Hang out with us for a little while. We'll give you our thoughts and recommendations spoiler free, and then we'll give you that warning when it's time. Here we go. Our discussion of Tetris. All right. So, Jim, do us a favor. Set this up for us. What is this movie? And what were your initial thoughts? Is this worth checking out? Since it's on a streaming platform and easily available, would you recommend skipping it? Where did you come down?
Oh, yeah. So this is Tetris. This is I'll read the IMDb summary and then talk about it a little bit and my impressions. This one stars Taron Egerton, and it's the story of how one of the world's most popular video games, Tetris, right? We've all played Tetris. Come on. I mean, we've all either played it or we know what it is. How one of the world's most popular video games, Tetris, found its way to players around the globe. International businessman Hank Rogers and Tetris inventor Alexei Pajitnov joined forces in the USSR. This was before the wall came down, risking it all to bring Tetris to the masses. So this is the story of, this isn't about necessarily a Tetris player. This isn't even really the story of how Tetris was developed, I guess you could say, or there's a little bit of that in here, but it's if I were to describe what this movie is really about to somebody, it's kind of a turnoff, right? It sounds very boring. It's the story of how someone went and won the rights to include Tetris on the Game Boy, on the Nintendo Game Boy, won the handheld rights for Tetris, and kind of the legal and political battle that happened over those rights. You wouldn't think that like a legal political, struggle over business rights or intellectual rights might be interesting. But this movie was. I really did enjoy this movie. Taron Egerton is good. He's great in everything that we've seen him in. I This movie is a little bit different in that it's styled as kind of think of like a spy thriller, like an Eastern Bloc, old Eastern Bloc before the Iron Curtain or the Wall came down, where it's just spy versus spy kind of thing, and in this case, it's company versus company, working with Russia and within Russia to secure those rights. Yeah, I said Taron Egerton's great. I did end up liking this movie a lot. This was one of three. Of course, it's another South by movie, a movie that we saw at South by Southwest. There are like three movies, and there's got to be a genre for this, Will. Movies about pop culture icon items, like the dramatized version of how these popular icon items came to be. Right? There was this movie Tetris. There was Blackberry, which is another movie that we saw at South by Southwest that we really liked. And then there was the movie Air, which was the closing night film that we didn't get to see at South by, but we've since actually seen. And they're all kind of, I see them kind of in the same genre. And I don't know if there's like a name for that, or if not, we need to coin one. But yeah, Tetris is great. It's kind of a nail biter at times. It's got some great characters. There's even some action set pieces in here that are kind of stylized a little bit, kind of in the way of the game of Tetris, which is kind of cool. But yeah, this one's worth seeing. It's available right now for streaming on Apple TV. So if you want to see it right now, hopefully you have Apple TV or know somebody with Apple TV Plus. And can watch it because it is available for streaming there.
Rock on. Jim, thank you so much for those initial thoughts. Will, how was this one for you?
First of all, Jim, to answer your question, I don't know if there exists a term for this, but it's sort of like a brand biopic, right? So that's what I'm going to call it, like a brand biopic.
Oh, I forgot another big one we saw that was also a big film at South by Southwest. Flamin'
Hot, yeah. Which also is that, yeah. So definitely, this is the year where how every year they're like, we're always like, oh, we're tired of biopics. We're tired of biopics. Like, well, they're like, well, what if we make them about products,
brand picks?
So I really like this one as well. And I'll be honest, both of these movies were surprises that I liked them, because when I first read about a new Dungeons and Dragons movie, I was like, please be good, please be good, please be good. And when I read they were making a movie adaptation of Tetris, before I knew what it was going to be, just when I read that log line, I was immediately like, oh, this is going to be awful. In my brain, this was like the Emoji Movie. In my brain, this was going to be like Pixels. I didn't know what to expect. And then the trailer came out and I started to get hopeful, right? Like, trailer looks kind of good. And
Thanks for giving me my nightmare tonight, Will, by mentioning Pixels.
You're going to be picturing like Taron Egerton and like Adam Sandler driving around as Tetris blocks fall from the sky.
Oh God.
But this ended up being really good. Like, you're right. This is like sort of like a Cold War thriller type vibe. Most of this film is really based around contract negotiations and sort of a group of 5, 6, 7 people overall, just sort of all vying for control of the Tetris rights, whether it be here or there or in this format or another, through a lot of like back and forth and kind of threats of violence or tricking one, just all these different things. And it ends up being remarkably compelling to watch. They get down to some, I don't want to say that this is like an incredibly like detailed contract law movie, but at the same time, like, you have to kind of understand what the terms are and to understand what the stakes are. And for them to have a lot of basically legalese but make it accessible and fun and even thrilling, I think goes to show kind of what the filmmakers are able to do here. I think the best parts of this, Taron Egerton's so good in this. I dare say this is probably his most like cemented front to back performance to date, right? Like, he's done some good things. I think he was a lot of fun in Rocket Man, but I think this one, there was something very transformative about what he did with Hank here. And I really enjoyed that. I also quite enjoyed just the overall look and feel of this movie. Like, it sort of has it feels like, so when I think of the 80s, I don't think of like rad, like bright colors like we always see when we see pictures of mall pop from the 80s. I think of like just how brown everything was, and this movie had a lot of that 80s brown to it, and I liked that. The one thing that I think kind of held this movie back a little bit for me, and only mildly so. This is a recommend for me. Every single scene of this movie worked very well, but every so often I was jarred by some of the changes from scene to scene. They were doing, sometimes you would go long stretches without any like video game effects layered over, and then sometimes there would just be some kind of thrown in, like there's a lot towards the front, there's some sort of in different scenes of this. So I kind of wish they'd either done a little more, done a little less, just to make it feel a little more cohesive there. More of a quibble, though. This was a really compelling watch, and I would also very highly recommend it.
All right, so two big recommends for this film. Just like the shapes from Tetris, sometimes this one did not fit for me. No, I'm just kidding. I loved this movie. It was great. Yeah, I think I'm gonna withhold most of my thoughts till spoilers, because I think you guys have pretty much said what I was going to say non-spoiler wise anyway. So I'll just talk a little bit about seeing this at South by Southwest Film Fest. This is really cool to see the premiere of this film. It was interesting in that we got to see this movie with the creator of Tetris himself, Alexei Pajitnov, in the audience, and there to be available for questions and stuff after the movie. And I got an opportunity to ask the creator of Tetris what his favorite Tetris shape is. I won't keep you all in suspense if you're as curious as I was. His answer is the J. Now, if you're scratching your head and like, J, there's not a J shape in Tetris. He's referring to the backwards L shape, but he calls it the J shape. I've not really seen it referenced as the J, but if the motherfucking creator of the game says it's a J, I'm calling it a J.
It's a fucking J
from now on.
Yeah.
So, really, really cool to see what his favorite shape is, but also to hear about his thoughts and experiences. Like, obviously, this movie is fictionalized, it's dramatized to some degree, but I mean, he really went through a lot of things that are in this movie, even if they're exaggerated a little, to get this game out into the world with the help of Hank. Really crazy to hear about some of his experiences, but I don't know, like growing up playing Tetris on Game Boy, I never really thought much about like, well, how did this game come bundled with my Game Boy? And, how did the rights to distribute this game, come to be a thing? But as an adult, I really appreciate those things. And Jim, you mentioned this whole brand biopic thing. I still don't know that we've settled on a great name, but as films that sort of fill that genre that we're making up, I think this one is a really fantastic one. It's definitely a big recommend from me. It's the goods, and it made me want to go back and play Tetris, but I had a disappointing experience because the Tetris that is on iOS is the most bloatwared, ad-filled, genericest thing that I have ever played on my iPhone. I wish I could cut everything around the Tetris window out and just have the base game. So
Oh, that's too
I don't
bad.
know if I need to like buy a Game Boy from Bookman's here in Tucson to get the original Tetris experience, but the movie definitely left me wanting it.
That sucks. So it made you want to go back to the 80s, play Tetris, and smoke because like that's what this movie is.
There was a lot
In
of
Russia.
there was a lot of smoking in Russia in this movie. It's true.
So, Brad, I think we mentioned this while in line, although it was a blur. I'm a big fan of the game Tetris Effect, which is sort of like their, sort of like they sync up like what you're doing on the game with like sort of like vibe music, and it's like one of the best like headspace. Like if you're ever stressed, like it is the single most like zen video game experience I can think of. Like, and it's on like. They have a VR version and a PS4 or 5, whatever version as well. So super good. And I just now thought of it. Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so ready? You know how there's always like the conversation of biopic versus biopic, how you pronounce it?
Biopic.
It's by B-U-Y opic.
Oh,
Biopic.
Oh, that's
I like
that's in the
it.
running.
I like
Definitely
it.
in the running.
Yes. Good stuff. All right. Well, fellas,
All right, Will.
how do you feel about making that jump into spoilers at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. If you have not yet seen Tetris, again, it is available on Apple TV Plus. Definitely worth a watch, in our opinion. Go check it out. And then if you want, because you've stepped away due to spoilers, just come on back, listen to this last review. If you've already seen the film, then continue to hang out with us because spoilers are a happening. Where do you guys want to start?
Can we start with Taron's mustache in this movie?
Sure.
Because it is one of the best movie mustache. Like this movie mustache will be on the list of like the 10 movie mustaches of the year for sure. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. As far as spoilers go, I mean, there's not a lot we can spoil here, right? I mean, we know how it turned out. We know that Hank, who is the character played by Taron Egerton in this movie, does secure the handheld rights because I guess the computer rights and the video game console rights were already established. But this game, when Game Boy came out, put Game Boy like on the map and made it like the huge success that it was, and it was in the billions with a B that this game helped sell Game Boys, to the masses. So it's pretty incredible. Kind of the vision. I'm always amazed at the vision of these folks. This guy Hank Rogers had. Well, first of all, the creator of Tetris, right? He created this fun game on his computer, and he was the inventor, right? So, but to have the vision of how this can be applied, to a handheld device that Nintendo was developing, and just propel that into like this massive thing. I think that was, to me, that was kind of like the eye-opening aspect of the story.
It's I think that you're right. From a spoiler perspective, like, we know that like at the end of the day, like Nintendo got Tetris, and it was
Right.
so we knew kind of like how it was going to be there. So it was really going to be a matter of like what twists and turns it was going to do to get there. There were several moments where it felt like it wasn't just hurdles that were in their way; it was just solid brick walls. But Hank's determination sort of found its way through and around those things. One thing that I do think from a film perspective that I think was super fun was this movie used its soundtrack very, very well. I enjoyed every single needle drop, and I especially enjoyed they did a scene to I'm holding out for a hero, and that song is now kind of in the I feel like that song is used all the time in movies, and I can't think of a time when it's been used poorly. Like I think that might be like, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say like that's the best soundtrack song of all time. Like make a movie with that song and it's gonna be good. But the needle drops were fantastic here. Did you guys were you guys jamming?
Yeah. I definitely did.
Yeah, and one of the things that I appreciated about this film's use of music was, especially with the Bonnie Tyler "Need a Hero" song, it wasn't Bonnie Tyler's version. It was
Yeah.
a Russian dance mix
Yes.
version of the song that they used, which was a nice variation. Because as much as I love that song, I do kind of, I don't know, like you just expect it now. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a staple. So it was,
I love the spin that
Yeah.
that spin that they put on it. It was great. We've got a question from Hammy, and I want to address this one if you guys don't
Yeah.
mind. He said, "Did the real life creator of Tetris mention anything about a car chase?" Well, I don't remember if that was actually asked of them in our screening. I would venture to say that maybe there wasn't an actual car chase where the cars turned into the blocks from Tetris
Wait.
during the car
What?
chase. Yeah. But I will say that I'm sure there were threats. Within the Soviet Union at the time, I'm sure there was strong arming and threats to both the Alexei, the creator of Tetris, and to Hank and the other business folks that were there trying to secure these rights. And one of the things that came out of this movie, which I thought was the angle that they portrayed this movie, was the friendship that developed between Hank and Alexei through this movie. I think that was one of the cornerstones that makes this movie stand out, was the way they portrayed this friendship. And sure enough, who do we get on the stage after the film played was those two guys, and they have a legitimate, they've kept a legitimate close friendship through all these years after their experience with Tetris, and become very, very close. Their families have become very close to each other, and I think that's wonderful to see. So props on the movie for showing for kind of highlighting that.
Yeah, and to answer the question, not specifically, but sort of adjacently, like in the Q&A, while they didn't talk about the car chase, they did talk about just some of the other like things that happened in real life versus how they appeared on screen. And, by and large, I got the impression that more or less this film is accurate but punched up, right? Like for convenience, right? Because there were a couple of moments where, like, at the end of the story, we're in spoilers, at the end of the story, Hank gets Alexei and his family airplane tickets to come back to the United States, where they can now live. And they said in the Q&A that, like, what really happened there was, yes, that happened, but they visited a few times to the States before finally moving. It wasn't like one monumental flight and then they're over here for good. That they kind of compressed like that sort of like year of like making trips before moving, into just like one movie magic thing. But I don't think that robs from the moment. Like, I think there are movies that do like twist the truth, and I think this one instead just sort of like takes the story and makes it like, streamlined and accessible. So yeah, I hope that. And he did also mention that there's a scene in the movie where the Russian consulate comes and like threatens the wife and the kids, and that actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
He said, we did actually get a threat that came from the Russian consulate, kind of a veiled threat about my family. So that made it in.
But I don't know if the KGB actually showed up to destroy all their furniture and, threaten them at gunpoint.
I would like to watch this movie with Hank and Alexei and just like every 5 minutes stop it and say, what about that?
Did that really happen?
Gosh, man. I mean, this is an Apple original film. You can watch this on Apple TV right now. I don't know if there's any plans for there to be like a Blu-ray or whatever release. It's always kind of hard to tell with some of these straight to stream sort of things. But man, I would love not a director's commentary, but an Alexei and Hank commentary of this movie. Wouldn't that be rad?
Oh, that'd be super cool.
That would be
awesome. That would be really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we just reviewed a movie about Dungeons and Dragons with fat dragons, and I mean, we know all that's realistic, but some of the things in this movie were probably a little bit too unrealistic.
That's okay. We'll give it a pass. Yeah. We'll give it a pass.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about kind of akin to what we were talking about with the Highball Lounge at Alamo Draft House. They did something similar for Tetris. They had a Tetris after hours party thing, and
Oh,
it was totally decked out like the 80s in the bar, and they had giant Tetris.
like an arcade.
Yeah, it was like an arcade, and it had giant like glowing Tetris shapes all over the place, and they gave you arcade tokens when you came in, and you could turn those in for like a packet of like Tetris gummies. They had like official gummies from the movie. Well, not from the movie, but like I guess to enjoy with the movie, as well as like Tetris themed drinks. They had a giant like photo area set up with like these guys walking around in suits with like pixelated video game heads, and it was
They
just
looked
super
like
fun.
Minecraft Steve, to give you an example of what
It was
these guys
yeah.
look like.
Yeah, exactly. But it was just a really cool way to like celebrate this movie. I feel like it was neat to be able to be on hand for that. I don't know. Sometimes when you see movies, like it's so easy to forget that like people made these movies. You know what I mean? But like going to something like that and seeing the cast and seeing the creators and the real people behind the story, like it's something like that. It's really cool to see them get celebrated. So I love that South by, Claudette and her crew, like bringing these people in, helping to get all this stuff going. I think it's awesome. So really hats off to them for that. So good.
Yeah, it's really nice to have it's really nice to come into an episode and have two movies that I just absolutely enjoyed, and that was the experience at the festival, right? Because there's sometimes this thing that happens at any festival, not South by specific, where you sort of have to make a choice between, am I going to do like a headliner movie, or am I going to take a chance on sort of a smaller movie that's not going to get distribution? And the choice with the headliner can sometimes be disappointing if not only is it going to be something that's going to be out in theaters shortly, but also it wasn't good, right? That can be kind of a sour pill to swallow. But when you get something where it's you and the entire crowd and everyone is just engaged and having a blast, it really makes those moments feel magical. And again, you don't have to have those moments to enjoy either of these two movies, but I am also very thankful that we do have those experiences, because I get to carry those with me. And I get to remember those, and I get to, share them when I'm talking to friends about the movies, so I'm just really thankful we got to do that.
Yeah, it just definitely adds a lot of depth to the experience of watching the movie, as well as, knowing, I am interested in how movies get made and how certain things happen behind the scenes or in front or behind the camera. So to get that insight and, and also kind of the experience of sharing that with other people at the festival, right? That's special as well to me. But I had one question for you guys, kind of as we, maybe get close to the end here. If South by were to offer one of the following things at this year's festival to commemorate these movies, which one would you pick? Are you ready? A family-sized bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos.
Okay.
B, a BlackBerry Pearl.
Okay.
C, a Game Boy with Tetris. Or D, a pair of Air Jordans. Which would you select?
Game Boy with Tetris.
Game Boy with Tetris.
How about you, Jim?
I have to say mine would probably be, I've had a BlackBerry already, so I would probably say, and Game Boy with Tetris. My daughter, when she was growing up, had one, and I had to lock it up several times as punishment. But I would say probably the family-sized bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos, because I became kind of a fan of Flamin' Hot Cheetos, which I never really cared for before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at least I can eat it.
No,
Right?
no, I've got to say, like, not only has that, Jim, you've had like a transformation, because you went from like, I don't know if I think I've had them
I
before,
don't know if I like
to
those.
afterwards, like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I kind of enjoyed that. And then
That was kind of
recently
good.
you were talking about how, like, oh yeah, I've been eating them a little bit more now. You're just like, I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
Funnel them into my mouth. I need them. So I'm here for it.
Those Flamin' Hot fries were actually a little bit better, so I got to search for those.
Babe, I have a question for you. Since
Yeah.
you took our Game Boy away several times, Do you still have her Game Boy sitting in a drawer somewhere, having
It
forgotten to
might
give
be.
it back?
It might still be in a drawer in the house somewhere, unless I gave it to Goodwill or something. Yeah.
All right.
Hers was like a Game Boy Color. It was one of those ones. I think you could put different like cartridges in it, if I remember right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm.
Hammy says he would get the Air Jordans so that he could sell them and then buy the other items.
That's
Jim.
actually a pretty.
Yeah,
that's
pretty smart.
That's the right
Yeah.
answer.
You can get a lot of Cheetos for $250, whatever the fuck they are.
Oh boy,
Yeah.
indeed. All right. Well, I think that about wraps us up for this week. It was so great. As always, Will, Jim, talk our movies with you fellas. I love that we have so much content coming out of South by Southwest Film 2023 to keep us busy for several weeks of episodes and written reviews and all that good stuff. And we're gonna tell you here in just a second how to find some of that additional coverage from South by. But we just want to say real quick, in case anybody from South by Southwest is listening, Claudette, the rest of the team, volunteers, filmmakers, creators, crew, just thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all that you do. Some really, really great films at the festival this year. It takes thousands of people to make that happen and look as smooth and just exceptional as it was. So I'm not wearing a hat, but if I was, I would tip it to you. Good stuff. Thank you. All right, cool. All right, well, let's tell people where they can connect with us online and also maybe find some additional South by coverage if they want to go looking through some of our movie reviews. Jim, where can folks do that?
If you want to check out movie ratings and reviews that I've done on everything that I watch now, then I'm being really good about it still. Check me out on Letterboxd at JJPOutWest. That's also my Twitter handle at JJPOutWest, where I don't tweet a lot, but I'm on there and I'm open to direct messages. Are they direct messages?
They are.
On Twitter? Yeah, DM me on Twitter or find me on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico, and send me messages there too. I'm a friendly guy. I'm one of the friendly guys. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Paladin Jim. Will, how can people connect with you and find your reviews?
Absolutely. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter. I'm at whatever Cove. It's right here. You can find me on Facebook. Just look for William Lindis. You can find me on Letterboxd. Like you mentioned, it's a great place to review, rank, and just look up films. You can either look for William Lindis or my handle there is Fundamental. You can find me on TikTok at the Movie Bear, and fitting for this show, I think you can probably find me on roll20.net as well. So just actually, I don't know the handles there work, to be honest, but just hit me up. Maybe we'll roll some D20s together.
All right. And you can find me on Letterboxd as well as Twitter, putting out movie reviews, rating and ranking films. I tweet about other stuff too, like Star Trek Picard, for instance, which is really great this year. You can find me on Letterboxd and Twitter at iBradPro. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm the Brad Harris, who probably has friends that are chubs, chasers, bears, etc. Not the one that is a conservative from the southern part of the United States. That ain't me. So I'm also fat and bearded, and he's skinny and smooth. So I think it's easy to tell the difference. So thanks so much for hanging out with us, everybody. As a reminder, we'll be back with you next week with our review of Super Mario Bros. And we'll be talking about some of the great docs coming out of South by Southwest Film. So don't want to miss it. We'll see you there. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And fare thee well, adventurers.
Do, 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 do.